We've looked at tracing, what it is, and then we've looked at using it, and we've seen the trace information show up at the bottom of our pages. And we also looked at doing this on individual pages or on an application level on all the pages. And what I want you to see now is really how to push tracing up into high gear, more or less. And we can really start to cover some ground here. We can write our own trace messages in our application. And this is some really, really fantastic stuff. We use the trace object that's already out there as part of .NET, and we're going to call the write method and pass it some information. We can do trace warn, and understand these are exactly the same. They do the same thing, except that trace writes get written in red. Okay? So we can write information and put it in the tracing based on what is going on in our program at different times. Keep in mind, on trace write, there's also a write if, and we can write traces out if certain conditions exist. So there's a lot of leeway here in how we want to handle this. Now, this is a good time to point out the debug object. We're not going to go into a lot of detail with it. The debug object is the same thing. Now, if I use trace write and trace warn, this is going to write things into the tracing. But as soon as I turn tracing off, this thing's not going to affect the web page anymore. Now, technically, they're still in there. When I put the project up on the web server, it'll still be there. If I use debug in a very similar way, then the debug objects get displayed in the output window of the debugger, and I can use this to print and check. It won't show up on my pages in my tracing, but it'll show up in some windows in the debugger. But when I actually compile this thing, or when it compiles, the debug statements don't get compiled, and so I don't have that out there in my code. So you can choose however you want to do this. Still, personally, I still like trace a little better, even if I pull the trace statements out before I stick it up on the web server. But I can use the syntax here, trace.write, so I'm calling the write method of the trace object, and I pass it a category and a message. Now, this category is extremely flexible. I can put whatever category I want. Now, if you remember back in the previous video, when we set application level tracing, we told it to sort by time. We can also tell it to sort by category. Okay, and so I can put whatever category I want in, and then in sorting I can put all those together. Or I can sort by the message. Let's go look at an example of some trace writes, some trace warns. So, to do that, let's go open VisualStudio.net, and let's go back out to page load. Now, think about something with this page load. If you remember, we set this thing up. I'm going to run this. We set this drop-down list and label up. They're actually bound together. So when I choose black or another color, it sets this label to whatever I've chosen here. Okay? What I want to know in tracing, just because I bring a trace up, I want to see in tracing what the user has done. Because it could be that I only get an error after the user has chosen this color or a certain color or even used this box or whatever. So I'm going to show you how to write a trace based on that action. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go out to our web page. We'll go to our web form code behind page. And on our drop down list, selected list, we're going to just write a trace dot, notice warn pops up there. And then we're going to create a category. We'll call it user action. And then we're going to write our message. Okay, and we're going to say user selected. And I'm going to do something else kind of cool. I'm going to put what they selected here. So notice I'm going to type, we know they're using drop down list 1. And I knew that from where I put it in a few minutes ago. And notice drop down list 1. And we want to see the selected item. And then the selected item, we want to see the text of that selected item. And then we'll just close our parentheses. Now, that's what's going to write into our trace. But now remember, let's go back and just run this and notice what's happening here. Nothing happens because I can hear some of you shouting at the computer. We never turned tracing on. So let's go back out here and turn tracing on. So for this page, how do we turn tracing on? We will simply click on our web form, go to Properties, scroll down to Tracing, Trace, say Trace is true. Now we'll run our web page. Now notice this is very interesting. We've got tracing, but notice we did a trace warn, but we don't see anything written in here about our user message. Notice it was called user action. And I'll go ahead and give you a hint. It should show up right here. But the reason our trace warn didn't show up is because that event hasn't happened. Okay? So I'm going to go choose orange from this, and notice it resent to the server. And now if I look down here, notice since I did trace warn, it's in red. And it says user action, user selected orange. So now this can tell me exactly what has happened on the web page. Okay, I'm going to go back up here. This time I'll choose blue. And if I look down here, notice user selected blue. So I can tell what's going on with that. Now, I want to show you quickly the only difference between trace warn and trace write. I'm going to go back and change warn to write, run this over, and I'll make a selection from my drop-down box. And you will notice it's here, it's just not in red. Right here it is. Okay, but it's just not in red. Most of the time you like to see these in red so that you can find your events very easily. So that's how to use trace write and trace warn. Again, if we get ready to put this out on the production server and we turn tracing off, you'll probably want to come back in here and take out your trace writes. But you can find these easily if you go to edit. You can do find and replace. And those we'll just do find. I can find trace statements, and I can go find them exactly right there. And I could even replace things with zeros or whatever, or spaces. But this will help me find them. Easy to do. That's tracing. Very easy to track yourself through your web pages, to see what's going on. And in the next set of videos, we're going to take a look at managing state. Microsoft did some really cool things to help us manage state between our web pages.